Good morning, everybody. Thank you. Oh, thank you. I like the call and response. Thank you so much for joining us here for the 15th annual CSIS South China Sea Conference. Conference so old, when we first started, Mischief Reef was still underwater. And I think then Secretary Clinton had not yet declared the pivot to Asia. So thank you for those of you who have stuck with it for 15 years. I'm sure there's at least a couple in the room. For those who don't know me, I'm Greg Poling. I direct the Southeast Asia program, as well as the Asia Maritime Transparency Initiative here. My career at CSIS is basically this conference. I think I started a month before we launched the first one, so they've kept me around, just like they have the conference. For those in the room with us, thank you especially for coming out. I know how difficult that can be in DC these days when everybody wants to watch online. And for those online, thank you for watching. So everything you hear today is going to be on the record. It will be recorded, available on our website and YouTube. Those in the room, we encourage you to participate in panels and the keynote. And those online, we ask you to participate as well. You can type questions in, and our moderators will be able to see them. Now, my last bit of housekeeping before I move on to the actual discussion is to thank our supporters. As with last year's conference, this one is made possible by the generous support of the Foundation for EC Studies and the governments of Japan, the Philippines, Australia, and New Zealand. So thank you all very much. And I think that's all I've got. So with that, let me introduce my colleague, Henrietta Levin, recently joined us as a senior fellow in the Freeman Chair for China Studies, who will kick off our first panel. Henrietta?
Great. Well, welcome to South China Sea Day. My name, again, is Henrietta Levin. I am newly a senior fellow here at CSIS with the Freeman Chair in China Studies after spending a while with the White House and the State Department working on South China Sea policy, among other things. So I am just so thrilled and honored to be able to moderate our first panel this morning on the state of play in the South China Sea. And of course, at a time when the international environment is, let's say, dynamic, some things remain the same. And the incredible strategic significance, the economic significance of the South China Sea certainly remains the same, if not increasing over time when it comes to questions of broader global stability, of the rules-based international order and international law, of really fundamental economic principles as well. So many of those questions converge on the South China Sea and in the South China Sea. And so I'm so thrilled that we have an incredible panel to kick off today's discussion regarding the state of play in the South China Sea. So I'll just briefly introduce them, and we'll let them speak in more detail to their work very soon. But we have Harrison Prétat, the Deputy Director and Fellow here at CSIS with the Asia Maritime Transparency Initiative, AMTI. We are lucky to have Krista Weigand, a professor and director of the Center for National Security and Foreign Affairs at the University of Tennessee. We have Phuong Thao Nguyen, a PhD candidate with the School of International Public Policy at Osaka University, and Hoo Chiew Ping, a senior fellow with the East Asian International Relations Caucus based in Malaysia. And so we are just so lucky, again, to have some of the world's premier experts on challenges in the South China Sea and how nations in Southeast Asia and China and the rest of the world are looking at the challenges and opportunities, again, in this critical part of the world. So with no further ado, I'll just ask for each of our panelists to perhaps offer a quick opening statement to set the tone for today's conversation. We'll try and leave as much time as possible for questions, recognizing that we have so many incredible experts out in the audience as well. And if I could ask, recognizing this is the 15th annual conference on the South China Sea, I think it would be helpful as well if in your opening remarks you could try and pull out, if you think back over the past year, what would be the most significant trend in the South China Sea in terms of what has changed, but then also what are the threads of continuity as we look to the next year as well. So over to Harrison, and we can go down the line from there.
All right, well, thank you, Henrietta. And thank you all for coming today and having me here. It's my 7th year at AMTI. And so I'm going to be looking at the past year in the South China Sea from the perspective that we look at it in terms of what we've seen on the water and in the satellite imagery on the islands. And looking at what has changed and what has stayed the same. I think that's the exact focus, and I'm glad that's what I prepared, because I didn't know she was going to ask that. One of the big changes, I have two changes and two things that I think have stayed the same. First change is that China-Philippine tensions have really shifted from Second Thomas Shoal, which was the focus for the past 3 years, to Scarborough Shoal. And we just published some research that we did looking at AIS data of China Coast Guard and Philippine law enforcement around Scarborough Shoal over the last 10 months, so since last August. And if you remember, last summer, the Philippines and China struck an agreement to reduce tensions at Second Thomas Shoal, and that really has worked so far. Resupply missions to Second Thomas have not been causing major incidents. Incidents like the one that took place exactly a year ago on June 17th that came very close to triggering US alliance commitments. So Second Thomas Shoal has been quiet, but activity around Scarborough has been picking up. So from our study of the ship tracking data, the number of China Coast Guard boats patrolling around Scarborough has doubled in 2025 compared to the previous 5 months in 2024. So it's averaging 95 ship days of patrols there every month. So it's about three boats there every single day. This has also corresponded with an increase in interactions between the Philippines and China around Scarborough Shoal. So every month in 2025 so far, there's been an average of 16 days where a China Coast Guard and Philippine Coast Guard have been interacting with each other in the water. So that's more often than not, one of those interactions occurs every day of the month. And then one of the big differences about this is that this is taking place not just at Scarborough, but also in a wider area around Scarborough Shoal. China has maintained a permanent Coast Guard presence at Scarborough Shoal since 2012. But these interactions with the Philippines are now taking place up to 70 nautical miles east of Scarborough Shoal, all the way up to the edge of the 9-dash line. So basically, when Philippine ships are coming in from Luzon, heading west toward the shoal, they're being met by the China Coast Guard right at the 9-dash line, and they're being followed, and they're dancing with each other all the way through their entire patrol of the area. Another change that's happened this year is that the Philippines is now experiencing, or at least publicly reporting for the first time, serious air-to-air interactions with China in the South China Sea. And this has been happening with the United States and with Australia, but the Philippines had not reported a dangerous air interaction with China until last August, when two PLA Air Force planes dropped flares in front of a Philippine Air Force aircraft. Another dangerous incident happened in February, where a Chinese Navy helicopter flew within 10 feet of a Philippine law enforcement aircraft doing maritime patrol around Scarborough Shoal. And so this is a continuing trend in the sense that dangerous air interactions have been part of China's portfolio over the last few years, but this is the first time that the Philippines is reporting it. So we'll have to see if that continues and where that goes. But I also have two things that I think have stayed largely the same. There's been incremental progress, perhaps, but one of them is that Vietnam is continuing to expand its outposts. It's been dredging new land, creating new land at its features in the Spratly Islands for several years now. But now it's getting to the point where it's starting to build infrastructure. And so we have the first new airstrip confirmed at Bark Canada Reef, where they've built an airstrip that's 3 times longer than the one they had previously at Spratly Island. And there's 3 other reefs, Ladd Reef, Pearson Reef, and Tennant Reef, where they could conceivably build another airstrip. They've also built at least 8 new harbors in the Spratly Islands, and that's going to allow much more significant presence of Vietnamese ships and more permanent presence of ships without the need to return to shore as often. But what stayed the same about this, besides the fact that they're continuing to develop these islands, is that for the most part, China has not responded publicly in a major way. We haven't seen any reactions from the China Coast Guard or any efforts to interfere with this expansion of Vietnamese outposts. The only thing we've seen was a complaint from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in February, where they publicly recognized and complained about Vietnam's activity for the first time. But besides that, not too much. So we'll have to wait and see, if and when China reacts to Vietnam's activity. Finally, the last thing I'll say the same is that the last thing that stayed the same is that China's Coast Guard maintained a constant presence all around the South China Sea again this year. Its Coast Guard is there virtually every day at areas like Vanguard Bank off of Vietnam, Luconia Shoals off of Malaysia, Scarborough Shoal, Second Thomas Shoal, D2 Island. It's maintaining a persistent Coast Guard presence, but it hasn't really made progress in terms of asserting China's control over those areas by way of stopping Southeast Asian economic activity, because Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam are all still exploring for new oil and gas. Those operations are continuing in the face of Chinese patrols and interference. So we're kind of in a holding pattern in terms of China's general strategy and the presence of its ships on the water. Will this change if the Philippines launches a new legal challenge? Will this change if China responds to Vietnam's island building at some point? It's possible, but in some ways, the overall picture of the South China Sea has been similar over the last several years. China's maintaining an incredible amount of Coast Guard presence all throughout the 9-dash line, but it's been unable to really stop Southeast Asia from using that space economically. So I'll leave it there.
Thanks so much for having me. So I'm going to actually take over right where Harrison ended by agreeing absolutely that China has really been just maintaining and not moving forward with any further claims or any actions. And I think I'm going to speak mostly about the reasons why that's the case. And I'm going to focus on the U.S. role in the South China Sea and the last year of the Biden administration and the first 5 months of the Trump administration, as well as efforts by our allies and partners, primarily Japan, Australia, and European allies that have stepped forward in the last couple of years especially. And these efforts really include predominantly commitments by the U.S. and its allies, Japan and Australia, outside countries not involved in the South China Sea, to allies and partners in disputants in the South China Sea, particularly the Philippines, but also Indonesia, Malaysia, and Vietnam, as well as FONOPs, of course, continued joint military exercises. There's been a continuation of and an increase in joint military exercises with more and more actors from outside of the region, in the region. Australia has really stepped up, Japan has stepped up, and those have played a big role. There has been regular condemnation of China's aggressive actions in the sea. There's been a continued emphasis for respect for international law, freedom of navigation, and finally, there have been some talks, continued talks during the Biden administration. There were regular talks with the Chinese about different aspects of the South China Sea, primarily maintaining calm and stability and not escalation. So I would say that the most salient effort that has been made has been the commitment to the Philippines, the U.S. Commitment to highlighting the Mutual Defense Treaty and really continuing, which started under the Trump administration in 2019, specifically when Pompeo stated that both vessels, aircraft, and armed forces would fall under the MDT, and that this would in fact trigger a U.S. response to defend the Philippines. And I think that the Biden administration has continued this. There have been several statements that are, if you look at the wording, they're exactly the same. They all through the Biden administration, including through the last year, and even in the last year of the Biden administration, there were 8 commitments to allies and partners in that region, 4 of which specifically cited the MDT, invoking the MDT. So there has been a consistent messaging from the first Trump administration and continued through the Biden administration. And in the first 5 months of Trump, just literally days after the inauguration, Secretary of State Rubio made the same statement, and then of course Secretary Hegseth went to the Philippines and made this statement as well. So that's a fairly consistent message that has not changed in the last year, and I think that has been, again, referring to Harrison's last comment, a real factor in why the Chinese have only been able to send their Coast Guard, and they've been effectively deterred from taking any military action beyond Coast Guard, and I think that's going to continue. I do not think that China wants to risk escalating in any way against the U.S. Both administrations, the last year of the Biden administration, of course, not surprisingly, heavy emphasis on respect for international law, but the Trump administration has also done this as well. The Trump administration is not known for talking about respect for international law, but in the South China Sea, there have been equal number of references about respect for international law with regard to freedom of navigation. Joint military exercises, there were 8 joint military exercises in the last 12 months of Biden's administration, and there have been 4 in the past 5 months. So again, consistent continuation. Of course, the Nimitz aircraft carrier group just left the region to head to the Middle East, so we'll see how that plays out. Of course, U.S. allies and partners, as I mentioned, Australia, Japan in particular, have really stepped up. Japan and the Philippines just did their own joint exercise 3 days ago, an anti-submarine exercise. So when you look at these numbers, there is really strong consistency again among the last year of the Biden administration and the Trump administration. Where it's different, where the major difference is with FONOPS and with talks with China. So the Biden administration engaged with China 9 times in the last year of its administration. Trump has not had any talks with China. Obviously, that's because there's a lot of focus on the trade war and tariffs, but I don't expect there to be any talks about the South China Sea. That's not a priority for the Trump administration, at least on the diplomacy side. At the same time, FONOPS, the Biden administration pursued a smaller number, about half overall, than the first Trump administration. There have not been any FONOPS in 2025 yet, but we should expect to see a continuation for the next few years of FONOPS. But again, that's just a consistency. That's been an ongoing strategy of the U.S. for many years, not just in the South China Sea. So I think that despite these differences, these smaller differences, the consistency of the administrations, the efforts of our allies and partners, particularly Japan, Australia, and the European allies, they have really stepped up. I think the signaling is very strong to China. It's a consistent message, and again, even though I don't expect any resolution anytime soon, I don't think anything will happen. I think that the current state of the South China Sea is going to just continue to maintain, it will be, but it's also very unlikely that China will have any escalatory actions. They're going to be very careful about any escalatory actions, particularly with the Philippines. So I think that we're just going to see more of the same, continued status quo, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It would be lovely to see more of a de-escalation of China withdrawing, but that's just not going to happen, obviously. But again, I think this is as good as we can get it for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Phuong Thao Nguyen.
Well, Hello. Thank you to our panel chair, and thank you to CSIS for the opportunity to contribute to this timely discussion. Well, as we're going to reflect on the current state of play in the South China Sea, I would like to focus our attention on one of the dimensions that is often less visible but increasingly consequential, which is China's malign influence operation. I will particularly focus on what has been evolved over the past year, and what we can expect in the latter half of 2025. So, well, when it comes to malign influence operation, China is often considered one of the most active player in this realm, and especially in the tension which associated with the tension in the South China Sea. I mean, it's geopolitical tension, and let me see. When we mentioned this over the last year, we can see that except for things like techniques or any toolkits that we often mention about the influence operation exploited by China, we should look at the narratives that we can see it overtly and apparently, which means that, say, compared to the past and the last year, we can see that the narratives that China tried to push up is quite similar to the one in the past, but it's already more and more sophisticated, more refined, especially in the geopolitical tension in the South China Sea. There are some common narratives that we often encounter these days when it comes to the geopolitical tension in the South China Sea. So the first one, which we often see, is that China tried to show doubt and confusion about the international law situation. I mean, the case of UNCLOS, and this is the way how China tried to distribute a story that there is loosening of international law. And the second one, often common seen narrative is about China tried to portray the U.S. as one of the most manipulative actor in the South China Sea, which means that, here the U.S. is kind of an actor that tries to seek to suppress, to encircle, to contain China from the region, especially leveraging the tension in the South China Sea. And following that, the Philippines is also portrayed as one of the most threat in the region, because it's due to the increasing cooperation between the Philippines and the U.S. And these are all basically designed to erode or undermine the regional country unity. And the third one, the third narrative that we come in is not really related, not directly related to the geopolitical tension in the South China Sea, but it is about economic, where China tried to distribute a story that the regional country is quite the biggest importer of China, but or in other words, it means like Southeast Asian country are more and more heavily reliant on Chinese economy. So, when there are some countries, yes, some of them in the region are really big importer of China, but this is not the whole story, and we should be careful when we encounter that kind of narrative. So let's take a look at the other country, the regional country, when they encounter with influence operation or disinformation over the last year, like the Philippines or Malaysia. So we can see that for the Philippines, that I already mentioned that China tried to portray a image of the Philippines as kind of actor, try to destabilizing the regional stability. Here we can see this year, compared to last year, Manila Dialogue on the South China Sea, we already have a panel discuss about the, malign influence operation. But this year we already bring it on board officially, and we discuss about it. For the Philippines, they raising voice about transparency initiative to get more support from the public in their support in the West Philippine Sea. Well, I think this is a good idea because we need the support from the public. But quite contrary, let's take a look at the Malaysian population. I mean, the Malaysian public support or favorability to China has increased quite dramatically. Say from 2022 to 2024, it's already increased from 39% to 77%, according to a survey. And the story behind this is that kind of Malaysia, they enjoy kind of complicated demographic, in which there has roughly 25% of the Malaysian Chinese people there, and then they also have a huge community of Muslim people that they are all pro Palestine, especially after the October in 2023. We see that they got the support from their leader, former leader, who is former Prime Minister Mahathir, for example. So those are the issues, or the reasons lead to that increase of favorability to China in Malaysia. So we can see that in the COVID-19, a lot of Malaysian people exposed to disinformation operation. Disinformation and malign influence operation. It depends on it's divided based on their language. For the English-speaking community, they are more exposed to receive more news about it's about vaccine, but more pro-Western vaccination, and they support more for vaccine, like more favoring in Pfizer or AstraZeneca. But for Malaysian and Chinese speaking community, they are more obvious. They are more. Lack of confidence. They are undermined. They believe in mRNA and more support for the Sinopharm vaccination. So we can say that control the narrative is quite critical, and we know that who controls the narrative controls people, right? So there are some kind of countermeasure we are mapping out in the region that, say, for the Philippines, they try to drama story, and they try to develop their transparency initiative. Recently, we discussed about how can we universalize this idea to the region, but we think that it's quite difficult to discuss about it, because we know that every country, they have their own story to tell the public, right? And we have different political regime, we have different culture and location and historical relationship with China. So what we should do is that look at the source and what source we should react to, how we can react to, or withdrawn from response, and the pros and cons. The risk if we react to influence operation, malign influence operation, without elevating the tension amongst the multi-ethnic communities, like the case of Malaysia or in Vietnam. And without raising the, escalation the tension in the region, especially between country with China. So there's still a story to go that is about a hot potato. AI or deepfakes. We has less responsive to it, and I hope that from now on we could focus more on these new techniques, and I believe that they are quite quite efficient for any state actor or even actor they want to exploit to target their goals. Well, I think is the time, so I will leave the story behind and we can go into more deeply conversation later on.
Great. Well, that transitions very elegantly to our next panelist who can speak in more depth to the perspective from Malaysia. Over to you.
Thank you so much. So since Phuong Thao is the only one that raised something about Malaysia, so I think today what I'm going to do is to highlight some of the situation and development coming out from Malaysia. So given that our government is often misunderstood as very much appeasing China, especially in the area of South China Sea, however, I would like to point to three major trends that is happening in Malaysia right now that show that is not the case. So first thing, when there is a very strong persuasion from the Philippines for the other South China Sea claimant states to adopt transparency initiative, Malaysia chose to adopt a cautious approach. This is because we prioritize diplomacy. So on that front, there is a discrete way of managing our relationship with China, but it doesn't mean that we are ignoring what is really happening on the ground out in the sea in our territorial waters and also exclusive economic zone. So with that, the second trend and development in Malaysia is the strengthening of our military capabilities. So there were a new Navy base under construction in the state of Sarawak, so that's where my home state was. So there is also new Air Force bases, one already completed in Sarawak, another one to be built in the state of Sabah. So both of these states are in East Malaysia, which is divided from the West Malaysia by the South China Sea. So by deploying squadrons, more Air Force squadrons to monitor our maritime airspace, our Malaysian armed forces is increasingly adopt higher awareness, higher level of maritime domain awareness. The third trend is what Krista has been mentioning, the joint military exercises. So even though the example cited does not include Malaysia, but we did have annual military exercises with US, not just the tri-services, but including the special forces as well. And we also have very extensive military exercises with the Australian armed forces. With France, we have very specific collaboration in Air Force and also Navy. And without working with the external partners, Malaysia also held our own military exercises. For example, Royal Malaysian Navy and also Royal Malaysian Air Force has been conducting capacity maritime exercise in Sabah and Sarawak. And as for little known ones, smaller scale, for example, even US ROK Malaysia Navy exercises. You cannot find this report publicly, but it has been done quietly. And not only in the military domain, in the enforcement agencies as well. Malaysian Coast Guard has been working with Japan Coast Guard in also enhancing our maritime capacity. And back in 2023, I don't think many news pick up as well when Malaysian Coast Guard is conducting maritime capacity exercises across the entire South China Sea from eastern region to the west. So that is actually in effect exercising their sovereignty over our exclusive economic zone and kind of sending a subtle message, not only to China, but to also to our regional partners that we are doing something about our capabilities. I think last but not least, I just want to highlight that it is not just national security concerns that Malaysia is prioritizing. We are also looking at our energy security. So Petronas, having contributing to about 20% or more of Malaysia's GDP, has been providing massive input into Malaysia government's South China Sea policy as well. So our oil and gas blocks are designed based on Malaysian map 1979, and it is still in effect until today. And so I'm grateful that Phuong mentioned about disinformation from China towards Malaysia. COVID-19 context aside, I think discussion about South China Sea in Malaysia is very much conducted in Malay language. So of course we have different ethnic groups as well. So discussion in Chinese, so even though both of us read Chinese, you can tell me more about that. I don't think the discussion is very vibrant among the Chinese Malaysian community. So this is one thing that I can say. And because I also read more about such discussion among the Malay majority community, because there is this concern about what China would do in our South China Sea as well. So, on final word, I think Malaysia has this tendency to deal with sensitive information, military-related, security-related in a very discreet manner. So our general direction would be decided upon by the Prime Minister Office, and for National Security Council, Malaysian Armed Forces or Defence Establishment, and together with Petronas, they would be the key actors in deciding our interests in South China Sea. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. The panelists, I think, have painted a really exceptional picture of a South China Sea in which there is some degree of continuity, in which China continues to leverage its maritime capabilities to press unlawful claims. But at the same time, I think we have heard some really interesting stories of innovation in how the Southeast Asian claimants have thought about exercising their rights when it comes to energy exploration, when it comes to military deterrence as well. And then, of course, I think the other trend that stood out to me was certainly the continued multilateralization of the South China Sea issue. And I think what reflects an understanding in capitals, not just in the Indo-Pacific around the world, but around the world, that what happens in the South China Sea matters for the economic and security interests of all of us. And so you see these really interesting new configurations when it comes to maritime exercises and other forms of cooperation. Recognizing that we only have about 20 minutes left in the conversation for this round, I want to open up the floor to questions. So I think we have some folks with mics. If you could just put up a hand, anyone who would like to weigh in with a question for the panel. I see one over here. We may just take a couple questions before going back to the panel to make sure everyone has an opportunity to pose their question.
Thank you so much. Is that good? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. My name is Rocco Cardicello. I have a question for Harrison. I was wondering if you could give a little bit more of an overview of China's military capabilities in terms of the ships that they use compared to other claimants in the South China Sea. Thank you.
Great. Go ahead.
Oh, sure. I'll just respond quickly to that one. I mean, when it comes to navies, it's a bit of a different story, and that's not an area that we monitor super intensely. But the primary actors are the Coast Guard, and from that perspective, the Chinese ships are consistently larger and better equipped than basically everything that the Southeast Asian claimants have. So, you know, consistently we're seeing 45-meter Philippine patrol boats dancing around with 100 or 130-meter China Coast Guard boats. Those boats often have 76-millimeter cannons, and some of those classes essentially were adapted from Navy ships themselves. So they're really kind of more of a Navy ship that was stripped of some of its armaments than a law enforcement boat from the ground up. So there's that difference. The other thing worth pointing out that I didn't mention, because it hasn't been a big story this year, is the Chinese Maritime militia. So along with the Coast Guard, which again, China has many more ships, and they're all based in the islands, able to resupply at China's large outposts. They also have hundreds of militia boats out there at any given time. And so the militia ships are Chinese trawlers that are the same size or bigger than a lot of the Philippine Coast Guard or Vietnam Coast Guard boats. And those ships are not equipped with special tools. They don't have armaments, but there are 100 to 200 ships that at any given moment are ready to assist or to occupy certain areas. And we saw that used a lot in the incidents at Second Thomas Shoal last year. We haven't seen as much activity from them this year.
Any further questions? I see a hand over here. And if folks could please state their name and affiliation before their question, that would be appreciated.
Thank you. Wang Gicho from South Korea. I'd like to ask a question to Harrison. So you explained the current trends of the South China situation. So more frequent and greater number of Chinese vessels, militia vessels as well as Coast Guard, right? So, I'd like to ask you, what would be the underlying causes of that kind of changed phenomena? You see that in Sprellis, you have 7 Chinese military bases, in particular the 3 large ones, right? I think my guess is that that would be the new material basis with which the PLA, Navy, and Coast Guard and militia as well able to kind of project its greater frequency and presence in the overall entire South China Sea. So can you, if you can, elaborate a little more on that? Thank you.
Sure. So I would say that the current level of activity we're seeing overall falls in line with what we've seen since 2019, which is when China's bases were fully complete and they really started deploying the Coast Guard and the militia in large numbers. So that from 2019 to now, they've maintained these persistent patrols. The militia has been present in the hundreds across unoccupied and occupied features. What we're seeing today, these shifting trends are more about where they're placing their boats and how many they're placing at one reef versus another. So last year we saw a really big focus on Second Thomas Shoal because there were so many tensions around the resupply missions there. So this year we're seeing a large number of Coast Guard centered at Scarborough Shoal. And I think we haven't done the full analysis of the other locations yet, but I would guess that that means that there's maybe slightly less Coast Guard patrol days at some other features in the South China Sea. China has not started expanding any other features or occupied any other features, so they're doing everything they have with the features that they've already built up. And from our analysis, those bases are really quite large and able to support a large amount of activity. So I don't anticipate them building another Mischief Reef or Fire Cross Reef. I think they can use these for a huge amount of activity as it is.
Great. There was a question over here, and then the table in the back. Let's take those two together.
Stanley Cover. I'm wondering if part of what the Chinese are doing might be related to historical experience. When I read their material, they say from the mid-19th to the mid-20th century, the threat to China came from the east, from the sea. I wonder if all this 9-dash line and all this is an attempt to create a defensive barrier, because they are looking at the current reality through the prism of their historical experience. And I never see this discussed, so I'm putting this forward. It's not unlike the American reaction to Pearl Harbor in the first days of the nuclear era for decades. We had aircraft constantly in the skies with nuclear weapons because we were not going to be caught flat-footed again. We were so traumatized by Pearl Harbor. So is something similar affecting the Chinese?
Thank you. And then the table in the back.
Yeah, as I have a question. As you mentioned, Vietnam is already very aggressively claimed the land in the Spratly Island, and also Vietnam built the military base, which is all under China's watch. And meanwhile, China's like Vietnam, when the Philippines sent the Coast Guard to cross the 9-dash line, China intercepted. But meanwhile, on the Vietnam side, China pretty much ignored. I just want to see if anyone analyzed what's in China's mindset, why China treated Vietnam and the Philippines so differently. Meanwhile, Vietnam was aggressively claimed land, built a military base, as you mentioned, built the airstrips there. And because they're both communist country, or what's in China's mind, why China ignored all these things happens?
Great. I'll round out this question round with one from our online viewership. Apologies, I'm going to have to stand up to read it. But it notes that disinformation in maritime disputes can be effectively countered through public diplomacy, or does it require multilateral intelligence cooperation? And that's a question from online viewer Sherry Chen. So perhaps we can take those three in terms of how China views the situation in the South China Sea, how its historical experience could affect that lens, why China then seems to have such distinct approaches, at least at certain times, to different claimants, whether it's the Philippines or Vietnam, and then this great question on disinformation. So I don't know who would like to jump in first.
I'll address the first question. I mean, sure, there is a historical narrative, absolutely, and I mean, you're right, every country does refer to its historical experience. I think it's valid, but it doesn't mean that China has a right to, I mean, it may explain why they're, where they, to some degree, but there's much more strategy going on with regard to what China is doing in terms of its projection of power and its blue water naval capacity and so forth. So it's one thing to say, sure, they were influenced historically, but it's another thing to say, okay, now we're going to move aggressively, go against, UNCLOS and international law, go against every other state in the region and other major power. So, I mean, this is clearly a much more of a power play. I mean, it may be, when they first started making their claims, several decades ago, there were certainly they've referenced historic documents and such, but yeah, I think that it's a small piece, but I think, it's not the major factor.
I guess I'll jump in on the Vietnam. Why is China reacting so forcefully to the Philippines and not at all to Vietnam, even though, arguably Vietnam's actions are more significant? There's a lot of theories about this. It is remarkable, that Philippine, even just patrol boats kind of doing maritime domain awareness patrols through the Spratlys attract a lot of Chinese attention. But China has not responded to Vietnam's construction activities. I think one of the aspects of this is that it probably would be pretty difficult for China to actually stop Vietnam. Vietnam has shown that it's willing to fight for certain things that it wants to achieve in the South China Sea, and the number of features that it's conducting activities at would make it quite difficult for China to try to blockade or really stop. Second Thomas Shoal was one location, but Vietnam is conducting reclamation at 10 different reefs all across the South China Sea. It'd be very difficult for China to kind of effectively interfere with that without risking some kind of conflict. The other aspect, I think, is probably that China wants to maintain a more positive relationship with Vietnam. China's image in the region, I think, has suffered quite a lot, not, least in part because of its South China Sea stance. And it's seen, especially during the Biden administration, a lot of efforts to rally these mini-lateral groups and kind of multilateralized approaches to countering, certain elements of China's maritime policy and other policies. I think China wants to have a good friend in Vietnam, and they want to have a good relationship, and so they see some value in that. And it also just may also be a question of resources. If they're really focused on the Philippines and they feel that that's more important to react to, partially because they see it as a conduit to the United States, which they don't see with Vietnam. The Philippines is a U.S. ally, so every action there they think is sending a message to Washington. they may be busy with that and say, you know what, we don't have the resources or the will right now to react to Vietnam.
Great. And then Phuong Thao, would you like to speak to the disinformation question?
All right. Well, thank you, Sarah Chen, for your question. And well, my answer is that we should take into account both of them. I mean, both public diplomacy and both and the multilateral intelligence cooperation. Why I am trying to say that because you know, disinformation operation is which the China, the country, the state actor, or even non-state actor try to exploit both covertly and overtly. So which we can see is apparently like the narrative. We can do it with public diplomacy, but the others like covert operation, we should react is covertly. So I already mentioned before that for disinformation in countries, they try to undermine the people mind in different respect. We can see it's not only in official, not only in official media, but also within the public communities. And let's talk about the case of Vietnam. Over the last year, we can see that the disinformation operation, or even the, we can see it, we should say it's the malign interference operation. There's a lot of story on the internet, on social media and platforms like the historical figures of Vietnam was the image was rewritten and distorted, and we can see that this is the way how they try to erode and to rewrite the story about the history of Vietnam and to guide the public opinion. So all in all, we should say that is, well, we can do everything like for the case of the Philippines, we do it with Chinese Transparency Initiative. But in case that it is not overt, we should reconsider and we should take more cooperation among the regional country to get to solidify the mutual belief, and also we should need to consider the contribution of the epistemic community. The science diplomacy. Yes. So this is my answer.
Great. Thank you. I think we have time for just one or two more questions. I want to make sure I'm not missing anything in this corner, but if folks could put up a hand. Okay. I see one up here and one back there.
Yes, I'm Liu Xiaobo from the Grandview Institution in China, in Beijing, and my question to Mr. Krista Weigand. Sorry. My pronunciation. And I'm wondering, how do you view of the Biden's and the Trump's administration, this administration's South China Sea policy? Because at his first administration in 2017, and I think the U.S. Navy's operation and activity in the South China Sea is very intense, and even the FONOPS, and I remember it's 14 or 45 days once. But right now, there has passed 6 months, and there's only one time for now. So that means some big change for his South China policy.
Maybe we could take the last question and then answer both together.
Good morning. My name's William Butler. I'm with the East Asia Bureau at the State Department. And my question is for you, Krista, as well. Sort of related to the previous question. You mentioned that military exercises have more or less stayed the same from the previous administration, whereas diplomatic engagement is obviously far less. So I want to ask you if you believe that it's a missed opportunity, or does it indicate that military deterrence is kind of becoming the sort of best way to address Chinese aggression?
Krista, I think this means the audience has decided you get the closing word
Okay,
for this
all right,
panel.
very good. So to answer both questions together, I think that the trade war has really dominated the interactions with China. So I don't think that they're de-emphasizing the South China Sea or even de-emphasizing talks or the diplomatic approach. I just think that, nor saying let's only do or predominantly do military. I'm hoping that eventually, there might be talks, but, the Trump administration was not real fond, well, I should say Trump was okay with talking individually, right? And that may still happen, that probably will happen. With the South China Sea specifically, probably not as much as from the State Department and, DOD's perspective. But I think that the trade war is just so dominant right now. It's just the primary focus of the Trump administration. I think that there will be, I think behind the scenes, certainly there are discussions of the South China Sea. Certainly, I mean, there are military exercises happening, but it's just not the priority right now, at least publicly. So hopefully, we will see more public or transparent discussion about the South China Sea from the Trump administration for the rest of the time in office. As we saw from the first administration, I think it is a priority. China, the key advisors like Elbridge Colby are saying we really need to focus on China. I think that's there's no question about that. It's just how much are we going to see public focus on the South China Sea, while the Biden administration really heavily made that a very open focus. Of course, I think Rubio and Hegstedt's statements up front did attempt to prioritize and show that the South China Sea is a priority. But again, the trade war seems to be the dominant issue right now.
Great. Well, I am being told we are out of time. But thank you so much to our panel for the really exceptional insights and our guests for exceptional questions. We're lucky to have a full day through which to continue these important discussions and get into even more detail. So thanks again, and enjoy the panels to come.